The neighborhood had always seemed quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of place where smiles on faces felt rehearsed and politeness carried an undertone of possession. Marcus and his wife, Angela, had moved there to give their children safety and space, believing in the American dream they had both worked so hard to build. Marcus, a decorated Navy SEAL veteran, had spent years defending his country in silence, carrying scars that no one could see. And Angela, a proud and resilient woman, had built her own career while nurturing her family with grace. They did not expect that the greatest battle they would face would unfold not on foreign soil, but in their own driveway, in the heart of a community meant to symbolize peace. It started with the HOA. What seemed at first like harmless notices about lawn care and mailbox paint quickly escalated into something uglier. Marcus and Angela noticed they were the only black family on the block, and it wasn't long before whispers, stares, and rules seemed to revolve solely around their household. They ignored it at first, choosing dignity over confrontation. But discrimination never stays quiet. It grows bold when it thinks no one will fight back. That Saturday evening was supposed to be simple. Angela had just returned from the store, bags in her hands, her laughter soft as she spoke with a neighbor's child who admired her dress. But then a black SUV pulled up, screeching too close to the curb. Out stepped three men dressed like officers, uniforms pressed but suspiciously unmarked. Their belts clinked with gear, but none of it looked official. Their faces carried arrogance, the kind born from entitlement rather than authority. They called themselves HOA security, though everyone knew there was no such thing. "Ma'am," one of them barked, "you can't park here. HOA regulations." His tone wasn't a request. It was a threat wrapped in a uniform. Angela, calm but firm, explained that it was her own driveway, her own home. But before her words could even finish, the man closest to her sneered, raised his hand, and in a flash of violence, slapped her across the face. The sound cracked the air like a whip. Her grocery bags fell, apples rolling across the concrete, her body stumbling, but her spirit refusing to bow. Inside the house, Marcus heard it. That sound, that strike, that violation. Years of combat had trained his instincts sharper than steel, and in that instant, every muscle, every memory, every ounce of discipline surged within him. He moved swiftly, silently, but his heart pounded with a fury that even war had never summoned. This was not an enemy on foreign ground. This was an attack on his wife, his partner, his queen, and no man lived to tell that story without consequence. When Marcus stepped out the front door, the three imposters didn't see a husband. They didn't see a black man they thought they could intimidate. They saw something they had never faced before: calm danger, quiet precision, and eyes that told a history of battles fought and survived. Marcus didn't yell. He didn't posture. He walked straight toward the man who had struck Angela, and without a word unleashed the kind of controlled power only a SEAL could master. One movement, one strike, and the man was on the ground, gasping for air he could no longer find. The second one lunged forward, perhaps out of bravado, perhaps out of ignorance. Marcus met him mid-charge, redirecting his momentum with brutal efficiency. Bones cracked. Arrogance shattered. The third man froze, his mask of false authority slipping into raw fear. He raised his hands, muttering about just doing our job. But Marcus stepped so close that the impostor could feel the breath of his fury. "Your job," Marcus growled, voice low but trembling with power, "was to intimidate. My job was to defend. Guess who wins?" Angela, though shaken, stood tall. She placed a steadying hand on Marcus's shoulder, grounding him, reminding him of the balance between fury and dignity. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some pretending shock, others silently complicit, knowing well the hostility that had brewed in their community. For the first time, the whispers of discrimination stood exposed under the harsh light of justice. Police sirens echoed minutes later, but when real officers arrived, the truth spilled out quickly. The so-called HOA cops had no legal authority, no official credentials, nothing but costumes and hatred. They had targeted Marcus and Angela because of the color of their skin, believing that power, even fake power, could silence dignity. But instead, they met resistance crafted in the fires of military service, sharpened by love, and unleashed with unshakable precision. As the night drew deeper, Angela refused to retreat into silence. Standing before the officers, the neighbors, and the trembling impostors, she spoke with clarity. "We bought this home. We belong here. We will not be bullied, not by lies, not by threats, and not by violence. You thought you could strike me down, but you only raised us higher. This is our family, our community too, and we will not be erased." Her words carried farther than any strike, farther than any uniform, farther than any lie. The men were arrested, charged not only with assault, but with impersonating law enforcement and harassment. The HOA board, once smug and untouchable, suddenly faced investigation for enabling a climate of hostility. What had been whispered behind closed doors now stood in courtrooms and headlines. Marcus and Angela did not seek revenge. They sought justice, and justice at long last had teeth. The days that followed were not easy. Some neighbors turned colder, some avoided them entirely, but others, those who had remained silent too long, found courage in Marcus and Angela's stand. Families who had once bowed their heads began raising their voices, challenging discriminatory rules and practices that had kept them captive in fear. What began as one night of violence became a catalyst for a movement within the neighborhood, a refusal to be silent any longer. Marcus often thought about that night in moments of quiet. He did not take pride in the violence he inflicted, but he held no regret either. For him, protecting his family was not an act of anger, it was an act of love. A SEAL does not fight because he wants to destroy. He fights because he must protect. And in that truth, Marcus found peace. Angela, ever resilient, carried the scar of that night not on her face, but in her memory. It did not weaken her. It strengthened her. Every time she walked past the driveway, every time she saw neighbors glance at her with either shame or newfound respect, she held her head higher. Her dignity had not been broken. It had been magnified. The story of that night spread beyond the neighborhood, shared on social media, whispered in church halls, spoken in community meetings. For many, Marcus and Angela became symbols of something far greater than themselves. The refusal to bend under the weight of discrimination, the power of standing tall against hatred, the truth that justice is not given, it is claimed, and so the quiet neighborhood was no longer so quiet. Change had come, and though it came with bruises and broken facades, it also came with hope. Marcus and Angela, once isolated targets, became leaders without asking. their courage inspiring others to reclaim the dignity that prejudice had stolen for far too long. In the end, the fake HOA cops did more than assault a woman. They awakened a warrior and a queen. They tried to silence a family, but instead, they gave them a platform. They thought they could impose fear, but what they met was unshakable love. Marcus and Angela's story was not just about one night, one slap, or one fight. It was about the timeless truth that dignity cannot be taken, only surrendered. And they had surrendered nothing. The neighborhood had learned a lesson, but the world too needed to hear it. Because wherever injustice hides, it must be dragged into the light. Wherever dignity is struck, it must rise taller. And wherever hate dares to disguise itself as power, it must be met with courage strong enough to break its face and love strong enough to heal the wound.